All right, so today we got Larry. Larry, can you like introduce yourself for the audience?
Hello, I'm Larry Lumbard. I'm currently a physical performance coach based out of Phoenix, Arizona. For the past 3 years, I've worked with the Phoenix Suns, and I'm formerly their head and strength and conditioning coach. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. I love training athletes. I've always kind of been attracted to, strength and conditioning and basketball in general. So yeah, just living my dream right now, man. Living my dream.
Nice, nice. So, uh, prior to like being a head strength coach at Phoenix Suns, I know you work with Corey, right? Corey Sassinger.
Yes,
So,
yes.
like, can you talk a little bit about like what is it like to work under him and like what did you learn from him?
Yeah, cool. So initially me and Corey met back in 2013. We were both at UAB, so that's University of Alabama, Birmingham. He was the head strength coach there, and I was a student assistant working with the men's basketball team. So that was kind of like our first interaction. And even though I wasn't necessarily working directly in strength and conditioning at the time, I always was just kind of, around the weight room and, looking at what the guys were doing because I myself trained. Um, and even then, I was kind of attracted to some of the things he did because it was different than what I had seen other coaches do, or, at this time, that's, 10 years ago. So, and you know how far the field has came over the past 10 years. So just back then, some of the things he was doing from a movement standpoint, and not necessarily, it wasn't always about bigger, faster, stronger. It was what makes sense for this guy, and how can I really improve his athletic performance so that we see it correlate to what he's doing on the court. So that was kind of the first thing I ever noticed about Corey. That's my guy though, man. Working with him was great. Um, when I first came on, it was Corey, it was me, and then it was Kohei Tomigawa. And just working with those other practitioners was like fantastic. I thought we were, a very cohesive group. And honestly, man, we all complemented each other well, and I think that's important in any staff. Like, you know, different practitioners, coaches, whatever. Like you should all kind of complement each other because when you complement each other, you're kind of able to, give the best product, which is for the athletes and the team or organization or whoever you're with.
Nice. So, what are the difference from being a like assistant strength coach and being the head strength coach?
Man, honestly, and like in the NBA, it's different, from team to team. But honestly, I would say the biggest difference for me was like being a head strength coach. Obviously, like you're making the calls now, and really, it just put me in a different seat when it came to decision making. Whether that's talking with the GM about something, or whether that's dealing directly with our medical staff on a rehab, versus hey, we put this plan together and now I'm helping implement it. You know, I'm more a part of actually creating the plan and some of the decision making. So that was the biggest thing. I was always kind of hands on and very vocal with the athletes. So from that standpoint, didn't much change. Um, and me personally, like I'm one of those guys, I want to greet everybody who comes in the door. If you walk by the weight room, if you come in the weight room, I'm going to talk to you, whether you're a player, whether you're a coach, because I think it's so important for one, people to understand what we're doing outside of just us. Because the more that the players understand, the more that the coaches understand, the more they see the value, right? The more they can figure out how we can help incorporate, what the different departments are doing, to put out the best product. So aside from me being a people's person, I just want people to understand as much as they can. And, maybe they can teach me something that I can, teach the athletes, or maybe I can teach them something that, maybe, okay, we can incorporate this movement skill or, this technique. So
Nice.
that's kind of that.
Nice. So you kind of brought up like from 10 years ago when you're at University of Alabama, watch
Uh-huh.
Corey Sassinger like do not train. His training philosophy is not just bigger, faster, stronger, but also about movement. So after 10 years, like you mentioned, the field had changed a lot and we
Hmm.
focus on movement a lot right now. And so there's like coaches utilize what's so called the France boss system. So can
Hmm.
you talk a little bit about how did you like or yeah, how did you found out like this system and how did you utilize it?
Man, so let's see. French buy systems was kind of something that I was seeing people do. And even kind of watching Corey before I, ever start working with the Suns, I was kind of seeing some of the water bag, aqua bags, whatever you want to call them, more of like a coordinated approach. And just training the body as one system instead of just, we're training the quads or we're training the hamstrings, right? But just training it as a dynamic system, which the body is, right? Nothing truly works in isolation. So that's what kind of initially brought me to, Franz Bosch and just starting to kind of understand his work. Even to this day, I think it's super complex. I won't say I understand all of it because I don't. And even when I'm like looking at new things or, you know, people around the field who I consider like industry leaders, people who create and innovate and bring things, I always want to, bring concepts, you know. Sometimes you don't necessarily need to do everything someone does. But if they bring a great concept, then take it, give them credit for it. Hey, I got this from such and such. I think it's good because of whatever. And what works with my athletes, for this given season, may or may not work with you and your athletes. So, but that's kind of how I came up, upon the Franz Bosch. And working in basketball, I felt like it was a great way to one prep or warm up the guys. It was just different, right? And specifically in basketball, sometimes you run into where guys don't want to lift. Like some of them have made it very far in their careers without lifting a whole lot of weights. So to go in there and try to convince somebody that lifting weights is gonna make them better, it just might not happen, right? So, as a coach, you have to find innovative ways and, creative things to create buy-in, right? And, at the end of the day, like you just want to help that athlete be the best version of themselves. So one thing I really liked about the Friends by systems was the aqua bag, right? Like you're creating these perturbations, right? When you're doing specific movement or movement patterns. And what it just allowed me to do was load different patterns, right? And create, variability and chaos. And if you think about it, what is sport? Variability and chaos, right? You never quite get the same thing, twice, right? So that was one thing as far as like transferring it to the actual sport. I also thought it was a good way to teach guys motor learning, right? So working on different movements. And I mean, you can even think of it as simple as if you have a guy who doesn't necessarily hinge well, right? Using those systems, whether it's, pre-practice or pre-game, you can kind of work in some of those movements, right? At different varying intensities, whether it's loaded or unloaded or, however you want to do it, but you can train that movement pattern in a more dynamic way that they may enjoy more or be able to see that crossover from training to sport, as well as now I'm teaching you how to become a better hinger, right? So Um, but yeah, those are kind of the a few of the things that kind of brought me to it. Um, like I say, it's a very complex system. Um, I'm still to this day, learning about it and kind of learning new things. So, but yeah, very good stuff.
Cool. So, besides the France ball system, like, is there any topic you want to dive into recently?
Man, so I'll say this over the past year, I've had the pleasure of working with Dean Little. So he's like director of performance science for the Phoenix Suns. Before that, he was in the MLB, and before that, he worked with the Memphis Grizzlies. Great mind. More importantly, he's a great guy. And so just diving into more of like the sports science things as far as workload monitoring and just different things like that. That is a big interest of mine. Um, and obviously I do it at a great level, anyway, working in the NBA, like that's a big part of my job. But at the same time, like the more I can learn about that, I think the more I can, help with, decision making and just different things of that nature. Or, as far as the workload influencing the training and, just things like that, just making it more cohesive and, comprehensive system.
Nice, nice. So, uh, the next thing I want to discuss is about like basketball. There's like in season and off season. So during the season, it's like we mentioned, like chaotic. You probably have to play like 3.5 game in a week, and there's like
Yes.
82 games. And if you make it to the playoff, there's more. So
Yes.
during the off season, what are your thoughts on like preparing the athlete for like the 82 games?
Man, so I'll say this first. When you're talking about, training NBA players, one, you have to understand if they're a starter, right? If they're a rotational player, or if they are a bench guy who are backing up the rotational players, right? Because all these things play a role in their development and what they can do in or out of season. So, for example, if we're working with starters, generally during the season, it is hard to uh, to make very big strength gains with starters. And the reason being is, you said it already. They play 82 games, 3 to 4 games a week, at potentially 30 to 40 minutes a game, right? So that's a lot of stress on the body already. So with guys like that, in the summer or off season as we call it, the first thing you want to do is just give them some time away. Like that's the first thing. Um, but after a few weeks, guys' bodies kind of return to normal, and they're feeling better. Okay, then you want to get after it, right? Like from an off-season standpoint, I'm trying to build them up to be as robust as possible. And that's just so that they can survive the next coming season because people think of the games being a lot, but also people, I think, unless you really work in it, you underestimate the toll that travel takes on the body. Even as a practitioner, sometimes it wears on me, and I don't even have to go out there and play. So yeah, off-season training, you want to build them to be robust as possible. You want to work on any movement deficiencies they may have. You want to train things that they're not good at, but you also want to train things that they are good at. And the reason I say that is because, sometimes weaknesses, right, need to be made better, obviously, right? Whether it's to prevent injury, or it may just help improve your performance, but also like improve those strengths, right? Because generally the strengths are why they are successful in the first place, right? Like without me or the next strength coach, like these guys would probably still be in the NBA. So as a practitioner, like it's my job to A, not hurt them or break them, right? But B, help them get to that next step. And so off season looks different for different guys, you know. A new guy coming into the league, 18 years old. I mean, he could be doing a lot of developmental work, depending on what university he came from and, what's his training age, things like that. And also, like, what's the team goal for him? You know, every guy's goal isn't to add weight, but if you're a 18-year-old 6'7" post player, and you come into the league at 210, you probably need to get a little bigger. Just maybe, and a part of that is, building the robustness and so that you can last when you're down there, banging with some of the biggest guys you'll ever see.
Nice. I like it. I like it. So, um, you talk about building the robustness for the athlete. Uh, and at the same time, it's not just like lifting heavier. So I
Yes.
know this is kind of like stupid question, but like, how to do that without lifting heavy?
Man, so that's a good question. I'll say this: sprinting is very important to athletic performance. Whether you play basketball, football, track, it doesn't matter. I think sprinting is very important. So one thing I like to do in the off season is sprinting with guys. Right. For one, they're producing the most force that you could ever produce. Um, Secondly, I think sprinting helps with body composition. So if you getting leaner, getting stronger, it does all that. Um, and the second thing it does is just helps guys move at high velocities, more than you can ever, move with a trap bar. So number one, that's a way to train guys at a high stimulus, right? Without necessarily lifting heavy weights. The other thing is, even some of the Franz Bosch stuff, um, training those movements with guys, right? Because some guys are great, skilled players, but they aren't necessarily great movers, right? So just showing them and teaching them how to get in positions. And then once they kind of get the concept of, okay, I can get here, now we want to load those positions, right? And we want to expose them to things that, they may see in the season or in a game at low velocities, right? Because everything in the NBA is well, not everything, but generally when you see, let me rephrase it, when you see guys get hurt, it's at higher velocities, right? So maybe if we can, expose some of these guys to those positions in lower velocities, when they do get exposed to them in the game, it's not a complete, shock to the brain of, oh my gosh, I've never been here, you know. And I think that is something that, can potentially, if not help prevent injury, it can also lessen injuries when they, do occur.
Nice, nice. So, um, and I do like your approach, like, uh, let's say when a young kid going like just got drafted and going to the league, their first
Mm-hmm.
priority, it probably isn't like lifting heavier. It depends on the position, depends on the goal. So, we already talked about off season. How about in season? I know like Corey and Daniel both are like good friends, and Daniel
Mm-hmm.
both come up with the quadra system and game day lift. So did you follow the game day lift or like you kind of have like different approach?
So I did follow it a little bit. Like I said, initially I take concepts from everywhere, everywhere, and just kind of, blend them. What both did with the quadrant system is, I think, exceptional. um, especially to teach, excuse me, younger and older practitioners how to basically manage stress. Because one thing as a strength and conditioning coach, especially in the NBA, I am a manager of stress, right? One stress I already know that's given to me is games, right? I can see that from probably late July when the schedule comes out, or whenever it is. But I know these will be high stress days for my athletes, right? And then the next thing is, those potential practice days. What do those look like, right? And then you also have to look at travel days, because all of that is stress, right, on the whole system. So definitely took some concepts from both. Also took concepts from Corey, as far as like microdosing. Um, and I don't know if Corey necessarily talks about this as a part of microdosing, but one of the main reasons that I love it, is that you get to have interaction with those athletes every day, which is, to me, I think is important. Because think about it, if there are some systems where guys may, lift two to three times a week, right? And that's cool. But that may be a situation where, I'm only getting them in the weight room 2 to 3 days out of 7. Whereas if I microdose, right, I may potentially get 2 to 3 sessions a day, or maybe 1 to 2. It just depends, on the athlete and who I'm dealing with. But at the end of the day, that just gives me more touch points, more time to train them, more time to work on, deficiencies, or things they're not good at, but also work on their strengths. Um, and like I say, it depends on where they are in their careers. So for starters, right, in season, um, I am trying to keep them as healthy as possible. Okay. So obviously, yes, we always want to try to build a system so that it's strong as possible, right? But at the same time, with the amount of games they're playing, with the amount of loads they're experiencing, with the amount of high speeds they're touching, right? I want to keep them on the court. So, it may be a lot of more health based things, right? The heavy lifting component may not be a whole lot with those guys. Whereas, if I have a rotational player, they may play 15 to 20 a game. Um, those guys can probably do a little bit more, right? Because they're not experiencing as much high lows and high speeds from the court, right? And then when you look at your bench guys who um, may not get into the game at all, or may only play if it's a blowout, or someone gets hurt, right? The main thing with those guys is, you want to continue to develop them as much as possible, right? So, and that doesn't necessarily mean strength, right? If you think a guy is as strong as he can be, okay, cool. Let's work on something else, right? Does he rotate well? If not, that's a potential thing you can work on, right? Because sports are very rotational in nature. Or if he doesn't move well, or if he's an okay athlete, you just want to kind of make him a better athlete, right? Maybe he's not quick off the ground, and these are things that we can measure and see via force plates and you know ton of testing options, right? in the modern world. So just looking at different things like that, we can see where we need to go with an athlete and kind of build out an individualized, program for him. So that's kind of the main, thing in season.
Nice, nice. So, um, there's like videos on Instagram or like YouTube watching you like do some movement. Like I think it's warm up for like KD, especially for the Achilles tendon. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
So I won't talk about Kevin in it in detail.
Yeah.
But I will say with any of guys, any of the guys when I'm doing warm up stuff, um, the first thing I want to do is get them out there and have them feeling good, right? So, depending on what it is, I may do some foot and ankle related. I may do something, kind of hip related to, just kind of encourage some internal, external rotation, things of that nature, right? Just to get the body feeling good. Um, the next thing I probably want to kind of introduce them to out there is some type of movement pattern, right? And then once we, hit a few reps of that pattern, now I want to load the pattern, right? And then once I kind of load the pattern, the last thing I want to do is give them something fast. And the reason, that I want to give them something fast is because generally when I'm warming guys up, after they leave me, the next thing they will do is go into the court for their shooting time. So by finishing my pregame routine with something fast, hopefully that correlates, and ramps them up, not just the muscles, but also the central nervous system, so that they go into their shooting routine, warm, ready to go and prime. So that's kind of my philosophy of what I'm doing when I'm, warming guys up pregame.
Nice, nice. So, you talk a lot about like load management, and like I think load management is a big topic like for every strength coach right now.
For
So,
sure.
mm, do you think that like, or what are the approach for you to like load, what's so called load management?
I would say this. I think load management is different for every guy. Um, right. So we talked about it kind of earlier with the friends by stuff. Like the human body is a very complex system, right? And what player A can handle may not necessarily be what player B can handle. Okay. So a lot of times when you look at load management, for one, you want to take into account injury history, right? And you want to also take into account age, minutes played, things of that nature. Excuse me. So when I think about load management, some guys can handle it, right? So anytime after the game you're looking at metrics of what guys have done. Um, the only time you really want to, when I say be cautious or flag something, is when they get you know really above their standard deviation or below, right? When you see them way above their average or way below, then you need to take a closer look. And that doesn't necessarily mean take a guy out, right? It just means that as a strength and conditioning practitioner, I need to be aware because we know that increased loads and increased speeds um, generally can lead to injury. It doesn't mean it's going to happen all the time, right? And just because they have a spike in something, that doesn't mean they will get injured. It just means that there is a bit of a greater risk, right? But also when you look at guys who are below their averages, that's something you also want to monitor because from a strength and conditioning coach standpoint, right? If you're below your averages, maybe I can help get you to those, in the weight room, whether it's some type of conditioning or you know some type of training modality, right? That will help you kind of get closer to what we want to see you at for that game. That way, when you do get back to your normal, you won't experience a real spike, right? Um, and that's just one way to kind of look at things. I think load management is a very complex topic. And I'm sure everybody has a different opinion on it. And how to handle it. And like I say, it's different from athlete to athlete. If you have a team full of young players, load management may not be as big a deal as if you have a team where the average age is 30 or 29, because that means you probably have a couple guys who are in their mid to late 30s, right? So they've been probably playing professional basketball for the last at least 12 to 15 years, right? So load management for them looks different than the 24-year-old. So I know people probably hate this, and anytime I'm talking to people, anytime they ask me questions, I always say it depends. Like there's tough. There isn't always like a this is the answer, especially in the world we live in. Like it depends. How old is he? What is he experienced? How long has he trained? Or how long has he been absent from basketball before we throw him back in there? Like all of these things are, things as a practitioner that I have to take into account before I, make a decision on what we do with the athlete. So that's kind of in a nutshell of how I think about things.
No, I like it. I like. I know. I know it depends, and like depends on the player capacity. Depends on the coach. Depends on the game they play.
For sure.
Yeah. So I know it's tough. So for the last 3 years, you work with the Suns. So there's
Hmm.
like Chris Paul. There's like Kevin Durant. There's like Devin Booker, Aiden. Tons of great player. So can you share like some stories you like maybe one story that like till now you still memorize or like that's the moment like you feel like wow.
Um, I'll say this from working with well, I'll say this, being in the collegiate setting, right? And then going, to the NBA, and truly working with like, the highest level of athletes. If you don't already know, you quickly learn that strength isn't always the answer. Um, and I say this because you can run into guys who don't lift a whole lot, but could probably move a house. Like that's just how strong they are. And it's interesting because it kind of goes against what traditional strength and conditioning teaches you and tells you. Um, and it's where you kind of learn that okay, this is high performance. And in college where bigger, faster, stronger may still work, because you're working with such young athletes who can probably adapt to anything, but you learn quickly that that doesn't work at this level of sport. So you kind of learn to adapt to the athlete, and along with that, I'll say you learn that the athlete is always right. And I think it's tough as a practitioner because you have certain athletes that will tell you anything because they don't necessarily want to listen. I mean, I'm sorry, don't necessarily want to lift. Um, but at the end of the day, you still have to listen to the athletes because nobody knows their bodies better than them. So if they tell you something, or if they tell you, this movement doesn't feel good, regardless of how great it looks, let's find your alternative, right? Let's do something that feels good. Because at the end of the day, even if they do it correct in your eyes, if it doesn't feel good to them, I look at that as a failure. Like, I failed as a coach because I'm not putting them in the best situation um to A, feel good, and B, play good. But working with, some of those guys was definitely a great experience. I'll say some of the best things that I experienced them with them was just talking basketball and just learning how they view the game and how smart and how high level IQ they actually have. Where it's especially like Chris, you're talking about a guy who's probably 3 steps ahead of the play. Um, and just, learning how he watches the game and how he does things. He knows how to put himself in the best position to make a play, right? And that's not to say, the player will always make the correct play, but the more times you put yourself in the right position, the higher chance it is, right, that you're gonna make those plays. So, um, but yeah, working with the Suns these past 3 years, definitely a great opportunity to work with some great athletes, great people, and some of probably the hardest working guys, in the league, I think.
Nice, nice. And I do like you mentioned that strength is all not always the answer, like from the beginning, like lifting heavy is not like the most important thing for the athletes. And you value how the athlete feels because like I always thought like um athlete knows their body like better than we do, and as long as like the athletes complain about something, I'm cutting that out. But
Mm-hmm.
like after I work with different coaches, I do saw like coaches want them to like just lift heavier, just hit higher numbers, and that was kind of crazy. So
Yep.
I do appreciate your approach and love it.
Yep. And one thing to go along with that is like, I mean, I'm sure you've done, tons of interviews with different coaches, right? And I'm sure you come across all kinds of philosophies. And the fact of the matter is they all work. Who's to say who's right or who's wrong, right? So that's why I truly believe you have to listen to the athletes and you have to do what is best for those athletes at that time. Because what may be great for my team may not be great for the same team I have in 2 to 3 years. It just depends on where those guys are at in that stage of development. So just constantly asking questions, you know, about what you're doing and, questioning yourself. Okay, cool. Was this effective? Was it not effective? And getting player feedback. The better relationships you build with players, the more feedback they'll give you. And that's huge and invaluable when it comes to what we do.
Nice, nice. I think that's all for what I have for you today. So for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
So on Instagram, you can follow me at _Larry_legend. And if you want to email me, you can email me at mrlumbard20@gmail.com. And I'll spell it MRLUMBARD, the number 20 @gmail.com.
Nice, nice. Wait a second.